The subtle pain of comparison stains my first recollections. Why can't you be more outgoing like your sister? As Katie enthralled guests with her dramatic tales, Mom would shake her head and tell me to get out of my corner and read. The pattern was established when we were both 8 years old. She was 6. Emily, honey, why don't you join the conversation? Even when Dad would offer words of encouragement, his tone conveyed disappointment instead of support. Katie, meantime, would be sitting on his knee and making everyone laugh with her animated expressions and crazy remarks. Into every facet of our lives, the partiality manifested itself. At the age of 7, Katie began ballet lessons with the most extravagant footwear and a brand new pink tutu. My mom groaned about the cost of band class when I begged to join a year later, but she managed to track down a used flute on eBay to satisfy my need. At the age of 12, I recall a certain Christmas. A new laptop would be great for all my studying. Katie, who was only 10 years old, got an iPhone, while I got some books and clothing. She needs it to stay in touch with all her friends, Mom explained, and I reluctantly swallowed my arguments regarding a laptop's necessity for my advanced placement coursework. Only my grandma, who was my dad's mother, appeared to accept me just as I was. When my parents would take Katie on family trips while I stayed behind, Grandma Martha would always be happy to have me over to her little but welcoming house. I remember watching them load up the car for yet another Disney World excursion and thinking, they're leaving me behind again. I fought back tears as I voiced my complaint. Their loss, my darling, Grandma said as she drew me still closer. Our journey together will be unique. By sharing tales from her youth and teaching me how to make her world-famous apple pie, she made those lonely summers memorable. I overheard my parents chatting in the kitchen one night when I was 15 years old. After spending hours studying for my SATs, I paused to fetch a glass of water. We need to start thinking about college funds, Dad was warning. Well, we can only afford to send one of them, Mom answered matter-of-factly. In drama club, Katie is demonstrating a lot of potential. A career in the performing arts would be perfect for her. What about Emily? The conviction in Dad's voice was absent when he inquired. Emily delves deep into her studies. Something will come to light for her. Scholarships might be an option for her. As their words hit me, I stood there. Glass dropped from my grasp. I reached a turning point that night. I would have to take matters into my own hands if they refused to prioritize my future. After that, I participated in science fairs, debating groups, and math contests whenever possible. I took part in every one of them. I stayed up late working on presentations and my college applications while Katie went on dates with guys from her middle school class. Mom would always reply, "Emily, you're just jealous that your sister has a social life," anytime I tried to bring up the fact that Katie's actions looked too preoccupied with boys for a 14-year-old. Every time I felt like giving up, I would lock myself in my room and hold on to my academic accomplishments, telling myself that it would all be worth it in the end. If I could create a world where I never had to compete for anyone's affection, I would. I just had to survive high school first. All those late nights of studying and participating in every possible academic competition finally paid off. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school, with a full scholarship to the State University School of Business Management. The day I got my acceptance letter, I ran to show my parents, but they were busy helping Katie prepare for her latest date. Moving to the dorms was like taking my first real breath of fresh air. My roommate, Sarah, became the sister I'd always wanted, someone who actually celebrated my achievements and supported my goals. The distance from my family felt liberating rather than lonely. The rare phone calls home always followed the same pattern. Katie's dating the captain of the football team now. Mom would gush, not even asking about my classes. She's so popular, everyone just loves her. Are you dating anyone, Emily? I'd mumble something about focusing on my studies and end the call as quickly as possible. The truth was, I was thriving. My professors praised my work ethic, and I was making real friends who valued me for who I was. Then, in my third year, the bomb dropped. During one of our infrequent family calls, Mom casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, Katie got accepted to Prestige University. We're so proud. We found her the cutest apartment near campus. You should see the view. Your father and I are handling all the expenses, of course. We want her to focus on her studies without worrying about money." I sat there in my cramped dorm room, phone pressed to my ear, fighting back tears of anger and hurt. The same parents who couldn't afford to help me with college were now fully funding Katie's education at one of the most expensive universities in the country. But I channeled that anger into determination. I graduated with honors and landed a job at Mitchell and Associates, one of the top consulting firms in the city. 2 years of working my ass off earned me a promotion to senior consultant. The night of the announcement, my colleagues insisted on taking me out to celebrate at the Blue Room, a trendy bar downtown. That's where I met James. He was charming, successful, and actually interested in hearing about my career. We exchanged numbers, and soon we were dating. For 2 years, everything felt perfect. James made me feel valued and loved, something I never really experienced with my family. Then came the wedding invitation from Katie. She was marrying Richard Thompson, some hotshot real estate developer she'd met in college. I almost didn't go, but James convinced me it would look worse if I didn't attend. The wedding was exactly what you'd expect, over the top and excessive. Katie practically floated around in her designer gown, making sure everyone knew she was becoming Mrs. Thompson before her big sister had even gotten engaged. I always knew I'd be first down the aisle. Katie smirked when we had our obligatory sister moment at the reception. "I mean, you were always so focused on your career and everything. But don't worry, Em. Maybe someday you'll find someone too." I plastered on my best fake smile and sipped my champagne, reminding myself that her approval didn't matter anymore. I had a good job, a loving boyfriend, and a life I'd built entirely on my own terms. A year after Katie's wedding, James and I were living together in a cozy apartment downtown. One night, after making dinner together, he got down on one knee in our tiny kitchen and took out a ring. My heart soared. I said yes and practically jumped into his arms. The ring wasn't as flashy as Katie's massive diamond, but it was perfect for me, elegant and understated. When I called my parents to share the news, Mom's response was predictably lukewarm. "Oh, that's nice, dear. We should meet him properly. Bring him over this weekend." The meeting was exactly as uncomfortable as I'd expected. Katie showed up uninvited, of course, wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than our monthly rent. "So, you finally found someone willing to marry you," she said with that familiar, condescending smile. "I was starting to worry you'd end up alone with your spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations." James squeezed my hand under the table, helping me keep my cool. To my surprise, Mom and Dad seemed to warm up to him during dinner. "We should host your engagement party," Mom suddenly announced. "We'll handle everything. It's the least we can do, considering we couldn't contribute to your education." The casual way she mentioned their financial favoritism made my blood boil, but James looked so excited about the idea that I agreed. 2 months later, we drove back to my parents' house for the party. They had actually done a nice job with the decorations, and seeing all our relatives gathered to celebrate us made me think that maybe, just maybe, things were changing. Katie showed up alone, explaining that Richard was away on business. She kept making snide comments about my dress being budget-friendly and how she could recommend a better wedding planner than the one we were considering. The party was in full swing when I realized I hadn't seen James for a while. "Has anyone seen my fiancé?" I asked, but everyone was too busy enjoying themselves to pay attention. Something felt off. I started searching through the house, eventually heading upstairs. As I approached my old bedroom, I heard noises that made my stomach drop. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The door creaked open, and there they were, James and Katie, tangled in the sheets of my childhood bed. "Emily, wait, I can explain." James scrambled to get dressed, his face red with either shame or exertion. I couldn't tell which. Katie didn't even bother covering herself properly. She just lay there with that smug smile I'd known my entire life. "Oh, Emily," she purred, "James just figured out what I've known all along. I'm the better sister. Always have been, always will be." My hands were shaking so badly I had to lean against the door frame. 28 years of being second best, and now this. I opened my mouth to scream, to finally let out decades of hurt and rage. But before I could, Mom and Dad burst into the room, obviously having heard the commotion. Mom took one look at the scene and burst into tears. "Emily, sweetie, please." She grabbed my arm, her voice trembling. "You can't tell anyone about this. Think about your sister." Dad joined in, his face ashen. "If Richard finds out about this, he'll divorce her. There's a prenup. She won't get a penny. Please, Emily, think about what this would do to the family." I stared at them in disbelief. Even now, even after catching my fiancé in bed with my married sister, their only concern was protecting Katie. "Please, baby, I'm so sorry." James was fully dressed now, reaching for me. "It was a mistake." She came on to me, and I yanked my arm away from his grasp. The clarity that washed over me in that moment was almost peaceful. Without a word, I turned and walked downstairs to where our guests were still celebrating. "Everyone," I called out, my voice surprisingly steady, "I have an announcement to make. There will not be a wedding. I'm very sorry for any inconvenience this may cause, especially to those who traveled to be here today. Please enjoy the food and drinks, but I need to leave now." Ignoring the gasps and whispers, I grabbed my purse and car keys. I could hear James calling after me, could see my mother's mascara-streaked face pleading with me, but I didn't stop. The drive home was a blur. As soon as I got to my apartment, I went into autopilot mode. I pulled out every cardboard box we had stored in the closet and methodically packed up James's belongings. Clothes, books, his precious golf clubs. Everything that was his went into boxes. I drove to the nearest storage facility, rented a unit, and dropped off all his things. Then I sent him one final text with the unit number and access code before blocking his number, his email, and all his social media accounts. My phone kept buzzing with messages from my parents, warnings about family loyalty, pleas to keep quiet about what happened, guilt trips about how this would destroy Katie's marriage. I blocked their numbers too. As I sat alone in my half-empty apartment that night, I realized something. This wasn't just about James's betrayal. This was the culmination of a lifetime of my family choosing Katie over me. They'd chosen her happiness over mine one too many times, and I was finally done. I poured myself a glass of wine and deleted Katie's contact information next. Then my parents. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. Life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. 3 years after the engagement disaster, I was grabbing coffee at a local market when I literally bumped into Michael. My coffee splashed all over his white shirt, and instead of getting angry, he laughed and asked if I'd let him buy me another one. I hesitated. After James, I'd sworn off dating, throwing myself into my work instead. But there was something different about Michael. Maybe it was his genuine smile or the way he didn't try too hard to impress me. "I promise I'm not a serial killer," he joked, noticing my reluctance. "Just a clumsy architect who'd like to replace your coffee and maybe get your number." "Just coffee," I said firmly, but somehow that coffee turned into dinner, and dinner turned into more dates. Michael never pushed. He understood my trust issues. When I finally told him about James and Katie, he let our relationship develop at my pace. No grand gestures, no rushing, just care and respect. 2 years later, he proposed during a quiet evening at home. No fancy restaurant, no audience, just us, some takeout Chinese, and a simple but beautiful ring. I said yes without hesitation. When his parents, Tom and Linda, insisted on throwing us a big wedding, my first instinct was to refuse, but they were so genuinely excited about welcoming me to their family. Linda even took me shopping for a wedding dress, insisting on paying for it herself. I had a Grandma Martha first. She'd been my rock through everything. Then my aunts, uncles, and cousins who had always treated me with genuine affection. But the question of my parents loomed large. After weeks of internal debate, I finally picked up the phone. "Mom, it's Emily." "Emily." She sounded shocked but happy. "We've heard about your engagement from Aunt Sarah. We were hoping." "I'm calling to invite you and Dad to the wedding." I cut in before I could lose my nerve. "Oh, sweetheart, we'd love to come. Have you sent an invitation to Katie and Richard? You know your sister would want to be there." "No," I said firmly, my hand tightening around the phone. "And I won't be inviting her. She lost that right when she slept with my fiancé at my engagement party, while she was married, I might add." I expected the usual protests, the usual excuses for Katie's behavior. Instead, there was just silence on the other end of the line. "The wedding is next month," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'll email you the details." My wedding day started perfectly. The venue looked beautiful. Michael's family had handled every detail with love and care, and I felt like a princess in my dress. But that perfect bubble burst the moment I walked into the reception hall. There she was, Katie, standing next to our parents, wearing a tight dress that showed off her obviously pregnant belly. She had that same smug smile I'd seen in my old bedroom 3 years ago. She had the nerve to wink at me, her husband Richard standing next to her. I marched straight to my parents, my hands shaking with rage. "What is she doing here?" I hissed. I specifically said she wasn't invited. "Now, Emily," Mom said in that patronizing tone I knew so well, "you're being ridiculous. Katie is your sister. Of course she needs to be at your wedding. That unfortunate incident was years ago. It's time to move on and forgive." I felt my world starting to spin, but then Michael's hand found mine and squeezed gently. His touch anchored me, reminding me that this was our day and I wouldn't let them ruin it. Took a deep breath and walked away, focusing on the fact that I was marrying the most wonderful man I'd ever met. The ceremony went smoothly, and soon we were at the reception. Everything was fine until the toast began. Mom stood up first, glass in hand. "I'm so happy that my second daughter has finally found her match," she said, smiling at the crowd. "Though, of course, Katie was first down the aisle, wasn't she? You two have always been so close, sharing everything." She went on and on about Katie's wedding, her marriage, her pregnancy, barely mentioning me or Michael. I gripped my champagne glass so hard I thought it might shatter. Michael's mom, Linda, reached over and patted my knee sympathetically. But the worst was yet to come. Katie stood up next, smoothing her dress over her pregnant belly. As a maid of honor at my own wedding, she started, completely ignoring the fact that I barely attended her wedding, let alone been part of it. "Emily has always looked up to me, and I always looked out for her. In fact, a few years ago, I actually saved her from making a huge mistake." She paused for dramatic effect, shooting me a knowing look. "She owes me for that. Really, everything I've done has been for her own good." The sheer audacity of her words, twisting her betrayal into some sort of sisterly favor, made my blood boil. She was actually standing there at my wedding that she wasn't even invited to, bragging about sleeping with my ex-fiancé. I couldn't take it anymore. My hands were trembling, but my resolve was firm as I stood up, my champagne glass still in hand. "You know what? Let me tell you all a story," I said, my voice clear and strong despite my racing heart. "Yes, I love Michael with all my heart. He's the best thing that's ever happened to me. He showed me what real love and support look like. But a few years ago, I was engaged to another man. We had our engagement party at my parents' house, just like Katie mentioned. The room fell silent. Katie's smug smile began to fade, replaced by a look of uncertainty I'd never seen on her face before. During that party, my dear sister, who was married at the time, I might add, decided to seduce my fiancé while her husband was away on business. I found her in bed with the man I was supposed to marry in my childhood bedroom, no less. Gasps echoed through the reception hall, the sound of silverware clattering against plates punctuating the shocked silence. Richard, Katie's husband, stood up slowly, his face ashen, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. Is this true? Katie's perfectly crafted composure finally cracked. Her mascara began to run as tears welled up in her eyes. Yes, but Richard, I can explain. It wasn't like that. Richard turned and walked out of the reception hall without another word, his steps echoing in the stunned silence. Katie ran after him, her pregnant belly making her awkward as she rushed through the door, calling his name desperately. Emily. Mom screamed, her face contorted with rage, her carefully styled hair coming loose as she jumped to her feet. How dare you? You've ruined everything. Why couldn't you just keep quiet like you always do? Why did you have to make a scene at your own wedding? No, Mom, I replied calmly, feeling oddly peaceful now that the truth was finally out. You ruined everything when you brought her here after I specifically said she wasn't invited. You ruined everything every time you chose her over me. You ruined everything when you defended her after she betrayed me in the worst possible way. This is just the consequences of your choices, finally catching up to all of you. Our parents stormed out, following Katie and Richard, their angry mutters fading as they left the hall. The reception hall was silent for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Then Michael stood up and took my hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. Well, he said with a warm smile that reached his eyes, I believe we were in the middle of celebrating our wedding. Would anyone like to dance? Aunt Sarah was the first to start clapping, followed by Grandma Martha, then Michael's family, and soon the whole room was applauding. Linda hugged me tight, whispering, I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You did the right thing. While on my vacation in Hawaii with Michael, I kept a safe distance as the events around my wedding unfolded like a soap drama. I found out about everything that transpired after Katie escorted Richard from our celebration through word of mouth from relatives, particularly Aunt Sarah and Grandma Martha. Richard promptly requested a divorce the next week. Despite Katie's best efforts, he refused to budge, despite her tears, promises, and threats. 2 months after she gave birth, Richard insisted on a DNA test. The revelation that Katie had likely suspected all along that the kid wasn't his didn't shock me. Due to their prenup and the evidence of her adultery, Katie was left with absolutely nothing. No alimony, no home, no expensive vehicle, not even her wardrobe and assortment of designer purses. The sale of their vacation property was necessary for Mom and Dad to contribute to Katie's legal expenses. She returned to live with them, this time with her little son. I couldn't help but notice the irony. The spoiled brat who had everything was now slumbering in her childhood bedroom and subsisting on our parents' retirement funds. Naturally, they made an effort to make me the center of their scrutiny. A month following my wedding, I began receiving angry phone calls. Mom yelled into my voicemail, You've ruined your sister's life. If you had just kept your mouth shut, everything would have been fine. Dad made it clear in his message that you are no longer their daughter. We raised you better than this. Emails, messages delivered via relatives, and even letters written to my office showed that they had discovered new ways to contact me when I blocked their numbers again. The message was consistent every time. I was the bad guy, the envious elder sister who ruined Katie's idyllic upbringing. But suddenly I had a fresh start, a life brimming with affection and true encouragement. I was warmly welcomed by Michael's family. Linda, his mom, would give me a call on Sundays simply to talk. His sister ended up being the one true buddy I lacked as a child. Even Tom, his stern father, found a way to show his love for his son by reserving the largest slice of his world-famous barbecue brisket for me whenever we had a family reunion. You know what the best part of marriage is? Michael approached me one night as we snuggled up on the couch, taking in the sunset from our brand new home, which we had purchased jointly, totally independent of our families. "What's that? Getting to choose your family?" he whispered as he kissed my forehead. "Blood doesn't always mean love, but love always means family." He had a point. I was finally blessed with the family I had always dreamed of, one that accepted me just as I was, flaws and all. My ideal spouse would be one who praised my achievements without passing judgment or making unfair comparisons. I was not disappointed by my in-laws because they treated me like a daughter. Michael is the apple of Grandma Martha's eye. She still pays us frequent visits. During her most recent visit, she assured me, "I always knew you'd find your way, sweetheart. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations." After that, I have no idea what became to Katie, and to be honest, I couldn't care less. Rumor has it that she is still attempting to start over with our parents. I don't know if they've come to terms with her true nature or if they're continuing to rationalize her actions. However, I am no longer kept awake by those ideas. Thanks to mutual regard, affection, and trust, I am now a part of my own family. Michael and I are excited to welcome our first child into the world, and I want this little one to know that they will be raised in a loving household that accepts them without condition. Revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about living life to the fullest. Indeed, I am engaged in precisely that.